Hello, everyone. We've gone live. It said so on the top
Yes.
of the screen, which makes me feel like years ago when I was younger and I used to watch Go Live. Did you ever watch that?
Was that the one on a Saturday morning?
Saturday morning show,
Saturday
yeah.
morning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh.
I love, I'm going to digress very quickly before we start
Yeah.
today, but I used to love Saturday morning TV.
Yes.
Absolutely loved it, as a child, Tiz was Saturday Swap Shop with Noel Edmonds and Keith Chegwin. And
Was Chris Tarrant?
Chris Tarrant, Lenny
No.
Henry, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A good sort of breeding ground. Good breeding ground for good TV people.
It was just
really,
nonsense. It was just nonsense,
Yeah.
And then people got gunged. People, people had to sit and watch interviews or watch videos of pop stars or have pop stars on miming. Ask them ridiculous questions like, when you were a child, did you always want to be a pop star? So
did you ask that question?
Yeah,
I thought you did.
Always. Maybe that's what I did though. I used to love watching those things. Maybe that's what I was thinking at the time. I was thinking one day I'm going to interview pop stars about stuff, and there you go. It all came true.
It did.
Marvelous. Anyway, welcome to WOW, everybody, and welcome to Friday as well. Today we've got a special guest on, Mark Stewart, who's going to talk to us about hands, or actually, to be more precise, talking to us about left-handedness. If that's the term. What's the technical term for it? Do we know? And perhaps Mark knows.
Well, to be honest, we bring the guest in. He'll have all the facts and the names and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
There we go. Well, let's bring Mark in. Mark, hello.
Hello there.
Hello. Is there a technical name for if you're left-handed? I mean, other than being left-handed, I don't know.
Well, having done Latin in my youth, the term is sinister, but maybe we shouldn't go there. But I think left-handed is fine.
So tell me, where does your fascination with left-handedness stem from? Where tell us a little bit about the journey.
Sure, will do. Your listeners and you yourselves may be surprised to know that actually I'm right-handed, as is my wife, as is our eldest son, but my youngest son, Robert, is completely left-sided. So he is left-eyed, left hand, and left foot. And this was about 30 years ago now that we started our business, looking for a pair of scissors for Robert when he was about 4. And my wife is an ex-teacher, and we noticed when Robert started school, for example, that the first week he was given a pair of right-handed scissors to use. And when we went to pick him up at the end of the day, every other child had got their picture on the wall. Robert hadn't even cut it out because he couldn't. And I thought, this is ridiculous. And I checked with my wife and said, when you did your teacher training, was there anything on helping left-handed children? And she said no. And so I did some inquiries. I checked with our local MP, who actually turned out to be really helpful because he is left-handed. And he also writes with what is commonly known as a sort of hook style of writing. So we could have ended up with a right-handed MP, a left-handed MP with a good style of writing, but actually have a left-handed MP with what I consider to be a poor style of writing was brilliant. And he tabled parliamentary questions. He had a half-hour German debate in the House of Commons. And my father-in-law, in fact, he was forced to write right-handed as a child. There's nobody on my side who's left-handed at all. I thought this is ridiculous, really. And I think the education system, from my perspective, had gone from being repressive to being passive. And what I want to do is make it more proactive because, it's very simple. My wife and I have written books. I do training for teachers, which is ridiculous in itself because A, I'm not a teacher, and B, I'm not left-handed. It's not rocket science. It's not difficult stuff. And most of it's pretty cheap to sort out, but it can make such a positive difference to the child, help them in so many different ways. And over the years, we've come across so many children who've been struggling and been able to help them, which is great, which is absolutely fantastic. But there's still room for improvement, certainly in policy and in training and resources as well, really.
I'm looking it up as we speak.
Whilst you're looking, I'm going to ask Mark a question, if I can, Mark, because I always think with these things, if you get numbers and figures, it starts to sort of, people get a perception or an understanding what it looks like. What's the ratio of right to left-handed, or what percentage of people are left-handed generally, and does it differ between male and female? Does it differ in different continents across the world? What does it look like in terms of numbers?
Well, a number of interesting questions there, and numbers is very interesting. In fact, one of the parliamentary questions that the MP raised for us, the responses from the Department of Education were that the department does not collect information on what proportion of pupils are left-handed, nor on whether being left-handed has an impact on likely educational achievement. So frankly, they haven't got a clue. And that's certainly the case now. Through our last MP, Robin Walker, I checked, and still they weren't going to do that, which seems very short-sighted to me, because if you don't know the size of the potential issue, how are you going to react accordingly? How are you going to provide appropriate resources or the training or whatever? I mean, if you just got one left-hander out of millions, then obviously you're not going to put the same amount of resources in, etc. So, but Worcestershire Local Education Authority, as it were, back in sort of 98, 99, something like that, did a survey, and it worked out about 13%. Now, if you reflect that percentage nationally in the UK, you're looking at well over 1.1 million left-handed children. Wow. So that's just the UK.
Yeah.
There are figures that would suggest 10, 12% globally.
Yep.
And globally is quite interesting, because back in 21, I co-founded a group called Left-In. My wife and I, we wrote some books. We did some of these resources. There was a guy in Australia who sold the books. There was a lady in Brazil who liked our book. She's got a left-handed daughter. There was a lady from China who came over to London to do some training. She came up to us to see a shop. So I knew there was a lady in South Africa also that I knew. So when COVID started, I thought, well, I know them, but maybe they don't know each other. Shall we have a Zoom, which was the new word? So we did, and we started this group, and we now have 21 different members around the globe. And interestingly, the last year and a half ago, we were putting together a bit of a paper, and one of the questions I asked all the members was, in their country, to their knowledge, did the education department know how many left-handed children they had? And none of them said yes. So there is still things are starting to happen, but there's still quite a lot of room for improvement, because in certain countries it's still you aren't allowed to write right-handed. You're forced to do things right-handed. So
a quick throw of it into Google for the UK, and it came up with about 10% of the population. So 1 in 10. You were saying possibly slightly over that. Slightly more men than female. It was also
yes, believed to be so. Yes, I mean, it's probably the largest minority in the whole education system, I would suggest. We've been battling. We had discussions with the Department of Education, and we're due to have some input into what was going to be the new handwriting framework. Sadly, the government decided they were going to have a general election, and so that was all cancelled. So all our efforts there were for naught. But we are having input into the new national curriculum, so we'll see into the review.
Stephen, interesting. Do you, as an organisation, well, presumably you do, but do you, as an organisation, collect data on left-handed, right-handed? Because you obviously have products that are left-handed, right-handed, etc. you know, and I wonder as well how many more organisations involved in, you know, ergonomic provision devices or whatever could actually collect and provide. I mean, it could, you know, be completely anonymous, obviously, but data on what's being used out there, left-handed, right-handed, just to feed back into the equation. It'd be quite interesting.
I mean, we don't collect it, and I haven't seen any sort of data other than the sort of thing you've seen and Mark's mentioned there. But I think one of the interesting things when I've gone around talking to end users is how many left-handed people, and I'm talking specific here, how many left-handed people mouse or use a right-handed mouse. And that's probably an indication of maybe lack of awareness that certain products exist, because if you look within our range and you look within other companies' ranges as well, there is certainly provision for left-handed mouse users, but there's not, the options are quite limited now. Obviously a lot of that will come down to, unfortunately, production costs and setup charges and moldings and things like that, but there are left-handed options out there and available. But it's interesting how many left-handed people, again, just with what I said at the start, was actually use their right hand to mouse because that product has not been made available to them, or their organization hasn't been aware that they can purchase such a thing, and therefore they've had to, almost like what you said there, Mark, about people being forced to write right-handed a number of years ago. To a degree, a lot of left-handed people have been forced to mouse right-handed, probably because of awareness or lack of understanding from either themselves or their employer.
I think that's quite an interesting point, and we did used to have some left-handed keyboards with the numeric pad on the left-hand side. But what I've found from talking to quite a lot of people is that actually using the mouse and the keyboard is a double-handed activity. And some left-handers are happy enough to use the mouse in their right hand because they can then use the keyboard in the left hand.
Yes.
And somebody told me a very interesting point or suggestion about why the QWERTY keyboard was designed as it was. Because if you're thinking back to the likes of the old typewriters, keys used to get stuck because they were used too quickly, and if you did it too quickly. And it interested me that the majority of the most used letters, the E, the A, the S, the T, the R, are actually in the left hand. So somebody suggested it was actually designed to slow right-handers down. But the double-handed activities are rather interesting. I don't know whether either of you play cricket or golf, but you can do both of those activities in what is deemed the right-handed way without actually using your right hand if you have to, because actually it's the left arm that does the main work in controlling. So certainly if I'm advising parents on how to try and find out whether their child is right or left-handed, I tell them to disregard double-handed activities because I think it can skew it. And if you think as a right-handed baby, you would put the food to your mouth with your right hand, which is great. Fine, you can do that. You're then told with a knife and fork, no, you're not going to do that. You've got to try and put the food to your mouth with your left hand with a fork. Yeah. So you've got to cut with the right and then put the food to your mouth with your left. And Robert would put the knife on the food and then sort of tear with a fork. But he was relatively happy doing that because he was putting the food to his mouth with his left hand. Mm. And by the way, you can get left-handed cake forks if any left-handers out there. Yeah, there are some fascinating things that are the left-handed you just wouldn't believe. Yeah.
It's quite interesting, actually, just mentioning the golf quickly. When I was young, I had golf lessons. And when I first started playing golf, I just naturally gravitated towards playing left-hand, although I'm dominant right.
Yeah, well, it would have been your right arm that did the main controlling. That's possibly why.
Yeah. However, what my golf pro at the time did was teach me to play. Although I wanted to play left-handed, he taught me to play right-handed. Not out of any prejudice, just because he said actually, if you can play both hands, it's really advantageous.
Yeah.
Certainly nowadays with all the reverse sweeps and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what's the biggest sort of, you mentioned scissors there, Mark, at the very start with Robert and school. What are the other sort of interesting items out there that come left-handed as opposed to right-handed that people maybe don't appreciate exist, or actually not just the people appreciate exist, actually left-handers really need? What are those things out there that we maybe don't naturally think of?
Yeah, certainly. Left-handed can openers that you hold in your right and turn away with your left.
Yeah.
Left-handed corkscrews. Now they're rather fun actually. If you want to play a joke on a right-handed friend, give them a left-handed corkscrew, but don't tell them it's left-handed. I had great fun when
trying to undo a bottle and it's doing nothing.
Yes, great fun. It tickles my sense of humour, that doesn't it? Yeah. Left-handed, let me think. Left-handed knives are quite interesting. They've got serrations on the right-hand side, so you've got a nice straight cut. You can get left-handed pens and pencils with the grip moulded into the barrel for you. And so they're really useful because all the components of handwriting are absolutely critical for the left-hander. As right-handers, we can get away with a load of rubbish, frankly, because we're going away from it all the time. The left-hander can't because you're coming from behind the writing. So you do have to adapt the technique. And thinking on that point, you have left-handed pencil sharpeners, left-handed rulers. If you don't understand the difference, the pencil sharpener you hold in your right and turn the pencil away with the left. Yeah. And the ruler is an interesting one, not for young children, but for slightly older ones. Because as right-handers, when we draw a line using a ruler, we pull the pencil rather than pushing it. So if the left-hander is using the right-handed ruler, they're having to push the pencil and they're going over the scale and obscuring it. So the left-handed ruler, the scale starts at the right-hand side. So the left-hander can pull rather than push, going away from the scale rather than obscuring it. And it's about doing things more naturally rather than having to manage and adapt all the time. There are left-handed spoons. We've got left-handed wooden spoons with a sort of extra little bit. So if you're curling around the pan, you can get it out that way. Left-handed spatulas, wooden spatulas, just angled down for left-handed use. So quite a few.
Lot, isn't it? It's an awful lot. Now it's interesting because a lot of what you're talking about are kind of fine motor neuron activities. That they're quite precise activities. Does it get less of a problem for someone who's left-handed as those actions get bigger, if you like? I mean, if when it comes to then something like sitting in a car and driving or whatever, or using a piece of machinery where everything's maybe more, it's a bigger movement, but it's all tends to be on the right hand side. Does that get easier for someone with a left hand, or
I wouldn't say necessarily. And talking about the driving, I remember remind me Chris Tarrant. I think he was on Talk Radio, something like that. Anyway, they were discussing driving, and a left-hander had issues because he didn't have the same control in his right foot on the accelerator that right-handers did. And I thought, wow, that could be quite dangerous, really, couldn't it? But quite interesting on that front. And the other thing, although it's obviously some things are harder for left-handers, there was somebody who told me that in shipbuilding, sometimes left-handers could get to the places right-handers couldn't, and actually they would be paid more because they could do things, get their left hands in where right-handers just couldn't. So, which I thought was quite interesting as well. But I mean, over the years there were telephonists, you putting plugs and all the rest of it, and they were, you couldn't be left-handed to do that because it was all set up for the right-hander.
Linda's just asked, who's watching, are there left-handed computer mice? Yes, there are. I'll let you take that, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, there are specific ones. I mean, if you look at probably the most sort of popular and well-known sort of vertical mouse is made by Evoluent. Evoluent do a left-handed mouse. Now, yes, there aren't as many variations as there are for the right-handed version, but they acknowledge that there is the requirement for a left-handed mouse. What you're seeing a lot more now of is the ability of a mouse to go between right and left-handed. So a lot of that ties into, if someone has the ability to work right and left-handed, they're able then to spread the workload out throughout the day. So simply and some of them by just moving a button or a switch on the back of the mouse, you can change which hand you operate in. So again, if you are able to use both, you can sort of smooth out. Because at the minute, if you think about it, if you're mousing, it's 100% in one hand and 0% in the other. and again, you'll know this, Graham, from assessments and things like that. If you can get that sort of smoothed out and balanced, you're sort of in effect taking the dominance of one arm away and actually spreading the workload.
It's quite an interesting point. I've had people over the years who I've assessed, and especially around using a numeric keypad, and they've literally developed a condition, a tendonitis or tendinopathitis condition in their wrist with their right hand, that they've literally had to stop working with that hand. But it's interesting how many right-handers, when they're forced down that line because of an injury or whatever, go, I'll never be able to use my left hand to do that. And one of the first things you want to say is, well, what do you think left-handers do, right?
Yeah,
because left-handers are kind of forced into that position.
Yeah.
So much. Yeah. But actually, the reality is, if you allow people the time to speed up and learn and retrain their brain, as it were, to do it, you can get there with both hands, right? And the point is that that's probably part of what we're seeing here is the same. And I understand where Mark was coming from earlier on about kind of numbers as well. It might be quite difficult to know exact numbers, because you wonder, a bit like things like neurodiversity or other things as well, how many people actually make a fuss about it? There might be more left-handers out there than shout about it and say, well, I've got a problem using this or that, because actually what they've done is they've learned to adapt.
Yeah, entirely that. And interestingly, I do some laterality questions in my training. And I ask them to note down which hand, which eye, which foot they're doing with. There are 10 questions. And then sort of work out what the numbers are afterwards. And it's very interesting. It's not a particularly scientific study, but I have had people who've ticked all the right boxes and all the left boxes. And I guess what that shows is that you will get people at either ends of the handedness spectrum, as it were. Some are really dominantly one side or the other. But the majority of us usually end up sort of in between, in the middle somewhere. We can use both hands, but usually one is more dominant than the other. And that's quite an interesting point, because I've had people say, well, at what age can you tell whether the child is going to be left-handed or not? And with Robert, we could actually tell really early, because we put him in the high chair, put a spoon in his right hand. As far right as you want, he'd move it straight to his left. And he was really dominantly left-handed. And one of the things that I'm hoping to get changed quite soon, actually, there's a book which parents get, new parents get if they had a child. It's called the Red Book, I think it is. And it shows the developmental milestones. And there are, I think it's 6 or 8 activities for the hand. And it says, okay, can the child do that? What it doesn't do, though, is say, or give an option for boxes underneath, saying actually which hand they're using it, whether it's right or left or both. And I think that would be a really helpful thing for parents with new children to appreciate. And maybe if they're doing everything left-handed, it just makes you think just that little bit, okay, maybe I need to turn myself up on this and see what we can do to help. Because it would have been really helpful for my wife and I, because we didn't have a clue, frankly. You know, everything was designed for right-handers. We didn't have to think about it. So it was quite a shock, really, when Robert came along and suddenly everything was going left-handed, and we had to think, right, well, you know, why is he struggling with certain things? How can we help him? What can we do? You know, and then you're telling nurseries left-handed, so where you're sitting in the classroom, that sort of thing, and then hopefully it'll go up the ages, and just raising awareness, I think, is really important.
Mark, you mentioned there about sport, and it got me thinking as you mentioned that and came back to it. I'm obviously a keen golfer, and also, you know, very much like following cricket. And there's something about watching a left-handed player. So if you think of golf, I always think of Phil Mickelson, you think of Bob McIntyre, you think of Bob Charles, you think of cricketers, you think instantly of David Gower, you know, Mark Butcher, the late great Graham Thorpe, and there's something about watching tennis, McEnroe. People there's something about what got out of my head, another great left-handed male tennis player, but there's something about watching a left-handed player with a racket or a bat or a club that it's just fascinating. I don't know what it is. There's no reason why, but there's just something that just, maybe it's because it looks so different to what we do that we're almost fascinated to go, how does he do it the other way on?
Yes, and interestingly, on the cricket front, and I was putting something together for a company in India, and over there there's there's stigma about being left-handed. There's the left hand is the dirty hand, etc., etc. And I found a picture of Bishan Bedi. I don't know whether you remember him. He was a left-handed spinner. He used to play for Northamptonshire. And I put his photograph on. And it's interesting because quite a lot of left-handed bowlers will actually bowl left-handed, but bat in what's deemed to be the right-handed way, which is quite interesting. And I think I'm correct. I may be wrong. But I gather, was it Brian Lara?
Yeah.
Somebody like that was actually, although he batted left-handed, was actually right-handed.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's again reverting back to that double-handed activity, which can be skewed. So
I wanted to ask Mark. I mean, I know a lot of your concentration is on sort of education and whatever around young people, which I think is great because actually that's where we all ought to start. And we've actually said before, unfortunately, too often when it comes to other things in like ergonomics and whatever, too much of that starts by the time people are in the office rather than at school. The conversation doesn't start early enough. But are you having conversations with people that are dealing with this in the workplace as well? Are you getting kind of feedback from anyone that's sort of getting viewpoints from the workplace?
In all honesty, no. But it would be useful to have that, certainly. I'm trying to have more conversations, certainly with people in the likes of the nurseries and schools. But I think our focus has been education because obviously my wife and our son and what he's been through in education. I'm a sort of one-man band, as it were, in the UK. So limited to what I can do. But certainly interested to hear from anybody to try and move things onward and raise awareness, because I think not only emotionally but also practically, if you've got a person who is capable to do the task easily, simply, and at speed, then you're going to get a much better work out of them, really. And the same with children in education. If you give them good self-esteem that they can do things like everybody else can, it's not going to be a case of why can't I cut out? It's actually raising the levels of achievement all round, and it's win-win for everybody, really.
I just think, Stephen, with it being quite a high percentage of people that we're talking about, I just wonder, how many, surely some of the people that we're connected with that are involved in human factors and collecting maybe people data, etc., probably do have information here that might be quite useful to Mark.
And it would be interesting, actually, and this is something for us to take away and sort of feed back into Mark, is speak to some of the companies. And we know lots and lots of people going out doing, DSE, display screen equipment assessments. I wonder if it's something that they have a box for and check and keep, it'd be interesting to know, is that something they're actually even looking for, or is it just not part of their consideration? It'd be interesting to sort of to find out, is that part of an assessment? I'm guessing, Graham, when you were doing assessments, was it something you were particularly looking for and marking down, or was it not considered part of the assessment?
It certainly wouldn't have been a question that needed to be addressed. I mean, I would have addressed it because if someone was dominant left-handed, etc., and it was then, I could see that it was then impacting the way that they were working, or the environment had been constructed in such a way that it was very dominant right hand, then we would have had a conversation about that. But because I'd worry, though, because it's not a question, that actually some people might miss that, because then, and that's the thing, isn't it? You know, that initial set of guidance, if you like, if it doesn't cover something, then there's always the opportunity for someone to completely overlook that. And personally, at the moment, I don't think it goes into enough depth, full stop, in the same way that, like last week, we had someone on talking about sleep. It never covers sleep. It never covers nutrition. It never, you know, and therefore, you know, you end up having a conversation with somebody. If you're pan trained and you've got depth of knowledge, and you know you're going into those situations as a good visualizer, and you're going to ask the right questions, you're going to get the right answers back. But if not, and you're relying very heavily on a set of guided questions, you're probably going to miss a lot. You know, I'm pretty certain that most people will probably miss left or right-handed dominance data, to be honest, at the moment, and that's quite worrying, especially when you're talking about that number of people that may well be affected in one way or another. You know, even I'm presuming even in terms of maybe choice of which kind of desk you have in a cluster of desks. You know, would be a fairly obvious one, because it may be that you know, and it's still the case today, that if you get like a cluster of desks, maybe if they're wave desks or whatever, you know, the wave might be on the right rather than on the left, and where your set of drawers is might be on the left or the right or whatever, and that could have a massive impact on you if you're having to do more of the work with your non-dominant hand.
It was interesting, the potentially the geographical area of numbers might be interesting, because I used to go to an exhibition in Norwich, and I had a lady who was a reception year teacher, and she said out of her year of 90 children, she had 60 left-handed. Wow. Which was amazing. Yeah, and I went back the following year and said, "Are you sure it wasn't 16?" She said, "No, 60. So 60 out of 90. You know, which is not an insubstantial amount, and that really makes you sit up and think, doesn't it?
It really does. What are your big? I mean, we're coming towards the end of this year, Mark. I mean, and this is an ongoing, you know, love and passion for you and project, as it were. What are you hoping to see as we go into 2025? Where do you want to progress to next? How can people help you out there?
Gosh, well, what I'm hoping is that in the review, the national review, that left-handed would be a requirement for teacher training. So there's an equality in policy in training, because I had a meeting a few years ago with Nick Gibb, who was the last minister for schools, and he was in charge of the national curriculum, and there was a bit on handwriting there, which was statutory. And underneath it, there was a bit which says left-handers should have appropriate guidance, and that was non-statutory. So it was almost that they thought, well, handwriting is really important, they should do it, but left-handers, well, we don't really know much about it. It should happen, but you know, that's non-statutory. So certainly that equality, it must be must. The other thing is that although words are great, it's action that we need. I did a video back in 1999 that the Teacher Training Agency sent out to all the training colleges in England. And I thought, yes, we're really getting somewhere. They weren't required to view it. So it didn't help them. And worst of all, it didn't help the children they were going to be teaching. So we want the words, but more importantly, we want the action. So that's what I'm after. And if we can get things starting in the early years as well. I've written to the Royal Centre for Early Childhood to try and get them to sort of equalize things, I guess, and really think about more about left-handedness more. Not that we want positive discrimination, we just want equality. So if you're going to think about and do things for right-handers, you should do it for the left, see how they're going to help. And certainly I think if you start this off in the early years, then potentially you're going to save an awful lot of hassle and pain and all the rest of it later. But obviously you need the people trained up to think about and act, more importantly, how they can help their left-handed children and left-handed people in society generally.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this is a fascinating subject, and I think, and we've got quite a lot of people watching, so I think a lot of people probably do think this is quite an interesting subject. If you're watching, by the way, and you do have a quick question for Mark before we finish today, do very quickly put it in the comments, and be happy to ask it. But I think one of the things that's possibly overlooked here is what conditions or what injury it might be causing people because things aren't set up properly for somebody with a left hand. Because I mean, you'll know, Stephen, that from looking at some of the solutions you deal with, if people are overstretching or over moving to one side or over bending to one side or whatever, because they're trying to use a particular hand to do that job, and everything's set up in one way, that is going to that could potentially cause injury.
You look at the musculoskeletal issues that people could be having. There'll be no statistics because it's not recorded, but how many are caused by someone who's left-handed adapting to a piece of right-handed equipment, or as you say, that overstretching, working outside the width of the shoulders and doing an overstretch? How much of that is contributing to the overall issues?
It could be as simple as something whereby, like, if you think about it, in a call center, for example, they put all of the telephone units on the right hand side, right? And for someone that's right-handed, they just do that. Someone that's left-handed, every single call they're doing that.
Yeah, banks used to put pens on the right hand side, when you're signing a check or whatever, and the left hand is having to go over and do it. But and certainly an awful lot of left-handers over the years have had to manage and adapt because there weren't the appropriate products for them, and they've just got on with it. But I think it's now time to sort of level up things, really.
Absolutely. Listen, I want to thank you, Mark, for coming on today. I think this has been fascinating. Folks, just a challenge really to the whole human factors audience, of which we have quite a number that watch or listen to this on a regular basis. If you have any data, or you want to speak to Mark about, potentially how you could do a study, or feedback to Mark from any kind of study you could do in terms of people data, or if you're looking at something in terms of a white paper for on people data, or feedback on musculoskeletal issues or whatever, and within that you can look at dominance of hand and whatever, please do let Mark know. Let us know as well, because we'd love to kind of get a sort of a second wind of this, maybe in another episode later on. So,
Graham, can I give you my contact details, or the website for your?
Yeah, please do.
The website is leftshoponline.co.uk. That's just one word, leftshoponline.co.uk. Email is info@leftshoponline.co.uk.
Lovely.
I'm waiting for Graham to put his fancy little banner across the bottom that sometimes appears. So
I won't do it. We'll
put it in the comments. We'll put it in the comments, shall we?
We will put it in the comments so people can actually click on it and link to it. But Mark, I say thank you so much. We'll let you go, and we look forward to speaking to you again. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely brilliant. What a great conversation.
Do you know what? When I saw who today's guest was, I thought that's going to be really interesting. But it just got bigger and bigger of a sort of a topic than I actually thought. It was fascinating when we sort of got into that. And I mean, a couple of things that sort of stuck out, and, you know, again, not just talking about what we do, but actually other people who make equipment. Like you said before, Mark referenced the challenge that people have with the number pad on the right-hand side. That's why ourselves and other manufacturers make separate numeric pads, so you can switch it onto the left-hand side. And I know it's quite an obvious thing, but it's just something worth reiterating. That's why it exists. It exists so you can, but also if you're ambidextrous, you get that shifting and spreading of workload, you can operate it right and left. So, you know, trying to alleviate some of those musculoskeletal challenges by actually having more of a 50-50 split rather than 100% on one and 0 on the other, whichever way round it is.
It even comes down into things like chair manufacturing as well, because we know that quite a lot of chairs that are actually designed to help people, etc., all of the leverage or all of the levers that you adjust sometimes are all built on the right hand side.
I was thinking that as we were talking, and suddenly thought it'd be a good one at some point to open up to, you know, our friends at Ergo Chair and at Flock and you know, other people. We've had Andrew Shepherd and Nick Arnold and Andy Pirry, but just be interesting to see what goes into their manufacturing process. Is left-handedness a consideration when they do make their chairs?
I know it is with some. I know it is with some. I know, for example, I know the and other chairs are available. So this is not promoting it, but the BMA Axia, for example, which comes under the Flock umbrella, that has dual control, so it's exactly the same left and right-handed. Yeah, whereas a lot of chairs, there some chairs, there are some things on the left-hand side and there's some things on the right, and there are other chairs where everything's on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
So you know, there you go. But maybe, you know, again, it could just be down to consideration. It might be, you know, when you're buying for a business, etc., and you're putting chairs out there, are you being considerate of your people? And if you know that some of your people are left-handed, are you saying to them, actually, do you need a chair where all of the controls for this are on the left-hand side? In which case, that you might need a slightly different chair from other people, which is fine. You know, but if you don't ask the question, you'll probably get the wrong answer.
Yeah.
You know, what a fascinating topic.
Brilliant. Really good.
Thanks to everybody. Thanks so much to Mark Stewart for coming in today and talking to us about that. And thanks to all of the people that have been watching. Thanks to people that have left the comments on as well. Another fascinating conversation around human factors. And we will be back same time, same place next week with more conversation. I have guests lined up already for next week as well. Until then, have a great week. Stay safe out there. And if you do want to contribute to today's conversation, just hit us up in comments on any of the social medias, and we do read those comments, and we will be happy to get back to you as well. Until next week, bye for now.